Photography is one of those passions that is easy to underestimate because we've grown up our whole life around people who are photographers, people who call themselves photographers, and at least for me, I thought if you just had a camera and you took photos, that made you a photographer. The first thing I wish I knew before I became a photographer is that photography is much more complex than just having a camera and taking a photo. I came into photography from the videography space, so I just assumed that all the settings that I use on my camera from videography would translate perfectly over to photography. Now, in some ways, that could be true. Some of the settings that you use in videography are great for certain photography disciplines. My camera settings for this YouTube video are shutter speed 1/50 and frame rate 24 frames per second. That gives me a very realistic motion blur when I move my hands, which I do often, and it makes it look like I'm talking to you in real life because this is close to how our eyes pick up motion. Our eyes don't see my hand move frame by frame by frame. They see it move in a blur, right? So that's kind of the point of videography. You want to mimic some type of motion, whether you want it to be true to life or you want it to be jittery or you want it to be hyper blurry. That's all part of the artistic eye for video. But in photography, instead of getting 24 frames in a second or getting 120 frames in a second, what we're getting is one frame. And we have to decide how we want to tell that story with that one frame. It took me a couple shoots to realize that I wasn't supposed to just set my shutter speed to 1/50 for photography, and that I actually had some room to move that shutter speed much faster to like 1/250. But then I started making the mistake of not understanding what the shutter speed did and how it impacted photography and why you would even crank it up or move it down in the first place. So I would just crank up the shutter speed if it was too dark outside because I had to shoot everything wide open, which is the next thing that I wish I knew when I started photography. You'll hear a lot on YouTube that you want to get a camera that has a very quick aperture. But one of the issues with that is it programs your mind to view a 1.8 aperture or 2.8 aperture as somehow superior than f4 or f8. Now, if you don't know what aperture is, check out this video, which will tell you everything you need to know about it to get started. I shot all of my photos at f2.8 or f1.8, whichever the lowest my lens at the time had, for so long. When I look back at some of those photos, I realized maybe the background was a little bit more interesting and I would have wanted to include it. But again, I came from a video sense, and a lot of times when you're doing video, you're not really including a ton of the background in your footage because that's one of the things that separates, how a video looks is the difference between what's in focus and what's out of focus. A lot of times you really are going to use that 2.8 or that 3.5. However, in photography, again, you got one frame and you're trying to tell as much of a story as you can with one frame. You don't have the ability to follow a subject and show all of that in one photo, at least not all in focus. I wish I did a little bit more studying on the specifics of photography before just assuming that video and photography were the same, and I believe I would have been able to avoid those first two pitfalls if I did that. Another important thing I wish I knew before I started photography was that if you want to really edit the images, you need to shoot in RAW. Now that may be obvious, but I was coming from video, and the version of RAW in video is S-Log, S-Log2, S-Log3, or shooting in a Cine profile. However, that's not really the same, it's not really the same concept when you're shooting as a photographer. You just want to set it to RAW, and then you can edit it in things like Lightroom. Now, to be transparent, I also once said that I was just going to be a natural photographer and I wasn't going to edit anything. I didn't want to do all that work. That was a very true and a very real sentiment that I had, but I started to realize the artistic element that came with editing, and editing photos actually helped me a lot when it came to editing my videos and cinema. Once I kind of got over the laziness of not wanting to edit, then I had to take some time and really learn how to edit. That's when I realized that you spend a lot more time editing your photos than you do taking them, which was difficult for me to understand and comprehend. But like anything, the more you do it, the better you get. One of the most important things I wish I knew was the value of education. I think growing up in school and going to college and stuff like that, you only really take an education when someone tells you to or when it's what you're supposed to do. A lot of professional photographers actually take courses from other photographers and they read books and they go through all these lessons and tutorials. That's not something I was doing. I taught myself so much about video from the internet, from YouTube University, and all these things. But for photography, again, I walked into it with this mindset that I understood it because I knew a lot about video. The two courses that I took have fundamentally changed how I look at photography and photography business. The first course that I took was a lighting fundamentals class by Jose Esquilin. He actually just did it for B&H Photo. So check the link in the description and you can check that out. That changed how I understood really photography as a whole, but also how I understood lighting. And that sparked me doing more specific research on lighting. And I ended up building a whole studio that would be the place that I really grew the most as a photographer in those private times where I could just take photos of myself, experiment with having the light here, which will give me more of a Rembrandt or a loop lighting effect, and how that may make a viewer feel versus me having the light all the way here with split lighting or the light coming down butterfly lighting. Those are all the different things that I was learning in that course. It was a 5-hour course in 45 degrees in a parking garage, but it absolutely changed how I looked at photography and really how I looked at the world since. The other course I took was an online course, and both of these were free. It was an online course one of my photographer friends invited me to, and she walked through her business process, and that's where I learned about things like Photo Mechanic, which is a culling software that helps you go through your photos, and that cut 90% of my time when I did a photo shoot and I was going through maybe 1,000 photos. Now I can go through 1,000 photos in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, as opposed to 2 hours, and still have to go through it again and then go through it again. And then she also taught me about Imagine AI. I'll also link her information. Her name is Michelle Harris. She's tremendous and a very successful photographer in the DMV area herself. I had no idea the amount of time you spent doing non-camera or photograph things as a photographer. I think it's not talked about enough. You really do spend 85 to 90% of your time editing, marketing, and all these things if you're not careful, or if you're not able to hire someone, or if you're not being more thoughtful about how to do everything synchronously. Another thing I wish I knew when I first started photography is understanding the power of networking and also really identifying what story do I want to tell and what is my perspective, and making sure I'm humble enough to be open to other perspectives as opposed to just assuming what's important and what I want to shoot when I get there or before I get there. I've had a couple opportunities to travel to places like Atlanta or New Orleans and be able to shoot photos. One of these places, I remember explicitly kind of ducking some people because in my mind, they weren't important people, and I was in a mindset of, I'm trying to get my business going and I want to be around the important people as much as possible. The irony in that is there were so many people who would have been great people for me to meet if I had the humility to just get to meet everyone as opposed to only connect with people to see what they could do for me and show them, hey, I can shoot your photos, as a way to really uplift my business. There was plenty of times where I may have gotten home and I may have still connected with them and collected their information or what have you, only to look up that person would have been a great partner for me. And it just really humbled me to realize, don't take anyone for granted and just try to be a good and a humble human being, particularly as a photographer, because when you're a photographer, you're gonna have people have all these requests for you. They're gonna be asking what type of camera you have, but they also may be asking you to take a photo, and you just never know which yes could change your life forever. If you're out on location and you have the opportunity to potentially bless someone with a photo or two, you just never know where that could go. And even if you're gonna say no to it, at least be kind and listen to what the person is saying and what their needs are, because not only will you be able to potentially meet their needs, but they could be meeting one of yours as well. For photographers, you should be networking with every photographer you come in contact with. That old random white guy could be a Leica master. And I don't mean master in terms of like slang, but I mean a literal Leica master that travels around the world to shoot these landscapes. And he could look so unassuming. I remember one of the Leica masters I came in contact with, he had his hiking shoes, he had a little cargo pants, you know what I'm talking about. And it was just so easy to walk past and not really see him. And part of my maturing, both as a photographer and as a human being, was trying to be a lot more like Christ in terms of seeing everyone and not just seeing the people who looked important. Again, this is very similar to what I was talking about for people who aren't in photography, where I just kind of looked past them and I was like, there's nothing you can do for me. In photography, don't try to look for what people can do for you. See if you can serve them. And I guarantee you, if you figure out how you can serve them, you're going to be successful in business. Which takes me to my last thing that I wish I knew before I started photography. There are going to be a lot of people who can shoot photos as well as you do. There's going to be a lot of people who use color similar to the way you do. There's only but so many cameras, so a lot of people are going to have your camera. The thing that differentiates a photographer that is successful and one who is not is much more likely how they treat people and the experience that they're able to provide, as opposed to how well they shoot photos. Frankly, when you're shooting a wedding, no matter how much the family or the bride and groom paid for you, if they're on hour 5 and their feet are hurting and it's 95 degrees outside, they may not want to talk to you, much less have your camera in their face. How you're able to deal with people who may get a little snarky with you, how you're able to deal when you're tired or you haven't eaten, all of those things can impact how your business is perceived and whether or not someone wants to share your information on a Facebook post as opposed to someone else's. Also, you never know who's watching you. There are some people I've worked with who just saw my lens and they like, he looks like he knows what he's doing. I want to hire him. For example, I was working someone's birthday party and someone in that birthday party contacted me about a brand shoot. And even though that hasn't exactly happened yet, just the fact that I was able to connect with her and I didn't even remember her from the party, but she was able to observe me, I think that's a sign of good business. So that's the one I want to leave you with. It's not just about how well you can shoot photos, because there's going to be a lot of successful photographers who, if you look at their photos, you may be like, it's kind of mid, but people will pay them thousands and thousands of dollars to work with them because they want to work with the photographer, him or herself, not just their camera. Or in the other way, no matter how good the glass, you can finish that. If you can remember that, it will help you be successful. And I wish I knew that going into photography. I think I would have taken more time to slow down as opposed to kind of almost take a rat race mentality and just try to beat everyone else and be competitive and all that. I would have taken time to sit down and say, what do you shoot with? Who are you? Why is this important to you? If someone's modeling, like, how'd you get into it? I would have taken time to really get to know these people, because these are the types of people you may end up second shooting for, or you may be working with down the road, and you just don't want to overlook those people because you already had in your mind what was important. So I hope this video helps you. Again, I hope this video helps you. This channel is meant to encourage you to knock the dust off your camera or go out and get that camera that you've been looking at for a while, but it's also going to equip you on different photo ideas you can use with that camera, ways you can use it to make money, but more importantly, ways you can use it to make an impact. I'll see you in the next video.